All right, so photosynthesis day 2 is going to act as a more like a general overview of the process of photosynthesis, and then when we get tomorrow, we're going to go a little bit more in depth. So um, let's see, we've got photosynthesis day 2. All right, so we are going to start um, talking about chlorophylls and chloroplasts because that is where this whole thing starts. Chlorophyll and chloroplasts. If you remember from our discussion of cell organelles, our organelles or our chloroplasts are the organelles that house all of the chlorophyll and all of the mechanisms that is required to carry out photosynthesis. So, in order to talk about, I'll make this big now. In order to learn about how those chloroplasts and chlorophyll take light energy and translate it into chemical energy, we have to talk really quickly about light. So, just a tiny sprinkling of physics for your morning. Light is how we quantify the energy from the sun. We could also say that there is heat coming off of the sun, but the energy that we are working with, especially with photosynthesis, is just going to be light energy. And it travels in wavelengths. That's how we measure it. Different wavelengths of light mean different things. I'm actually going to pull up a picture because it might help. Pull this up. All right. This will help. So, oh, it's really big. Oh well. These are our light wavelengths up here. A wavelength is essentially how we get from like this point to this point, or you can measure from the high points. From here to here is the same distance as here to here, and that's a wavelength. And we've got everything from like 0.0001 nanometers to 100 meters. And down here, when those wavelengths are really, really, really close to one another, we've got gamma rays, which is like radiation stuff. If you're a comic book or a Marvel person, it is the radiation that Bruce Banner was exposed to when he got turned into the Hulk. And then we have X-rays. So gamma rays are really, really bad for us. We try to limit our exposure to gamma rays. X-rays are a little less damaging, but they can still cause damage. It's why when you go get X-rays at the dentist, they put that big lead vest on you, because we try to minimize the amount of exposure you have to X-rays. But those X-rays are powerful enough to go through the flesh in your body, but not powerful enough to go through the bones in your body, which is why we use X-rays to see if somebody has broken a bone, because the X-rays that travel through just the fleshy stuff will just go right through, but the ones that hit your bones will bounce back, and when they bounce back, that is the image that we see. And then we have UV light, which is what we think of when we think about like the light from the sun that is like really, really damaging. And then right through here, that little line right there is all of our visible light. Our red, orange, yellow, green, blue, purples. That's our rainbow. All of the light that we see, all of our visible light, is between 340 and like 760 nanometers. That's the amount of visible light that we can see. So visible light is our colors, and our colors are red, orange, yellow, green, blue, violet, indigo violet. We're a Jabooth. You're a big rainbow person. So, plants can gather the sun's energy with molecules called pigments. Pigments is something that a lot of people is a word used a lot when people talk about color. Paint is a really big thing when people talk about whether or not something is pigmented. Eyeshadow is a really big thing when people talk about if something is pigmented. Those pigments are actually just molecules that are really, really good at either catching or absorbing or reflecting light. So, let's see. Yes. When a pigment absorbs a color, we don't see it. We only see the colors or the wavelengths that are reflected. So if something is green, like plant cells, that means that they are absorbing all wavelengths of light except for the green ones. The green ones are reflecting back out and are hitting us in our eyes, and that is why we perceive them as green. When something is white, that means it is reflecting all of the colors back at you. And if something is black, it means it is absorbing all of the colors. Black is an absence of color, white is all of the colors. So, if you think about it this way, light energy can also be transformed to heat energy relatively quickly. If it's a really, really hot day outside, you have a friend with a white car and you have a friend with a black car. Which car would you rather get into if it's really, really hot outside? I thought I heard something. The white one, because the black car is going to absorb all of the light possible, which means the black car is going to be a lot hotter than the white car. If you ever get into a car with like black leather seats versus like lighter colored leather seats, those black leather seats will hurt your legs as opposed to the white ones, because black pigments absorb all of the colors and white pigments reflect all of the colors. So when we talk about plants, the principal pigment, or like the main pigment, is called chlorophyll. There is a chlorophyll A and a chlorophyll B. Chlorophyll A comes in handy more often than chlorophyll B does. They absorb blue, violets, and reds. They reflect green, which is why our photosynthesizers appear green most of the time. When our trees turn pretty colors at the beginning of fall, it is because those leaves are dying off, which means they are degrading that chlorophyll because they don't need it anymore. And that is when they kind of lose that green color. So, yeah, if you were to look at a graph that measures the colors, so violet, blue, green, yellow, orange, red, And this is the amount absorbed. This is an absorption spectrum. We can measure how well a certain molecule absorbs a certain color. So if this is going to be chlorophyll A, its absorption spectrum looks kind of like this. So it's going to absorb a lot of violets and a lot of blues. It's going to reflect all of these greens and yellows and spike back up for the reds. Chlorophyll B has a similar kind of idea, but it looks more like that. And then we have a couple other accessory pigments. They don't play as critical of a role. They're not as common as chlorophyll A in plant cells, but they do something like that. So it's important for these cells to have multiple pigments, because if it was just chlorophyll A, we would have just this green line of colors. But because we have these other ones, we've kind of expanded our range that we like peak perform at, or plants peak perform at, by giving us more pigments. Does that make sense? Cool. All right. So that's our mini physics lesson of the day. Now we are going to talk about chloroplasts. Chloroplasts are the organelle that the chlorophyll lives in, that carries out photosynthesis. So chloroplast, the organelle where photosynthesis takes place. I'm going to draw it. So we're going to start off with just a circle. That is our outer membrane. Keeps everything inside of it. The cool thing about chloroplasts, though, is that they have an inner membrane. Let's see. Yeah. So inside our chloroplasts, we have a third type of membrane. That membrane has organized itself into stacks. So each one of these little circles is a thylakoid. And the membrane that makes up the thylakoid is called the thylakoid membrane. But there's not just one stack. These stacks can connect to one another. And each stack is called a granum. So we've got our outer membrane, our inner membrane, and in that inner membrane, we've got a stack of membranes, and those stack of membranes are called thylakoids. And when we're talking about an entire stack, that is a granum. Now, just like our organelles are floating around in cytoplasm, our granum and our thylakoids are floating around in something called the stroma. The space between the inner membrane and the thylakoid membrane is called the stroma. So stroma is our fluid portion of the chloroplast. Okay. Being able to orient yourself in the chloroplast for the rest of photosynthesis is relatively important. Does anybody have any questions about this? So, energy collection. How does chlorophyll capture energy? It would be really, really hard to convert solar energy into chemical energy if we couldn't capture the solar energy in the first place. So, chlorophyll is really, really good at absorbing energy. It is why it is so abundant on Earth. It takes that energy, it absorbs energy, and it transfers the energy to electrons. Which creates a supply of high energy electrons. And those high energy electrons are what gets transferred from, or is how we get from light energy to chemical energy. So now we have to figure out a way to kind of harness those high energy electrons. Now, high energy electrons, which I'm going to abbreviate as just E minus, that'll mean electrons from now on, need a special carrier. They can't stay on chlorophyll for very long. So they are transferred to something called an electron carrier. So they are transferred to an electron carrier. To get the electron from point A to point B, from the chlorophyll to wherever it needs to go to be transformed into chemical energy. So the example the book used was a baked potato. So if the baked potato is our high energy electron, we know it's high energy because it's really, really hot. If it's in the oven, that means it's like in the chlorophyll, right? It is being heated up. The energy is being transferred into it. But we want to use it as food because that's what we do with potatoes. So we need to transfer it from the oven to the plate. The plate would be like our chemical energy. And our oven mitt would be like the electron carrier. It would allow us to transfer the electron or the potato from the chlorophyll or from the oven to the food substances or to our plate without losing too much heat. So, be like oven, plate, potato. we're going to use the oven mitt to get from one place to another. Now, the oven mitt is going to be a compound called NADP+. So just alone, like a spare oven mitt would be NADP+. When the oven mitt is holding the potato, or NADP+ with an electron, it is called NADPH. So the unpowered version of the electron carrier is NADP+, and the electrified, the energetic version of our electron carrier is NADPH. So in this case, we would have NADP+ here, NADPH here, and NAP+ here because we have put the potato back down. Only when the oven mitt has the potato, or only when the electron carrier has the electron, is it NADPH. When it doesn't have the electron, it is NADP+. Does that make sense? Okay. Yes, all right. So, I think I covered that. Yeah. NADP+ stands for nicotinamide, adenine, dinucleotide, phosphate. You don't have to remember that, but it does stand for something, which is why I figured I'd say it. It holds 2 electrons and a hydrogen. That's where we get the H in NADPH. So, now we know the components: chlorophyll, electrons, electron carriers. How does this whole process happen? Biology is one of those things where you kind of have to have a baseline understanding of the chemistry and physics that go into the process before you actually learn the process itself. So, in words, we've got carbon dioxide and water with light energy being transformed into sugars and oxygen. That is the equation for photosynthesis. Carbon dioxide plus water with light energy gives us sugars and oxygen. But this isn't the way you're going to see it written. Usually you will see it written in symbols, because that takes a lot of time to write out. And it doesn't give us quite enough information. In symbols, we've got 6 CO2, or 6 molecules of carbon dioxide, plus 6 H2O. So we've got 6 molecules of water. We're still going to have that arrow with light And that will give us 6 oxygen and 1 glucose, or C6H12O6. 6 CO2 plus 6 H2O with light energy will give us 6 O2 plus C6 H12O6. This is glucose. I think I have enough time to get through this. So, this whole process happens in 2 parts. 2 parts. The first is the light-dependent interactions, or reactions. These reactions depend on the light. They require light and pigments, because we have to have something that can absorb that light. They use sunlight to make ATP and NADPH. Talked about ATP yesterday. These light reactions can make some of it. But remember, we can't store it for very long, so we still have to take this ATP and use it to make something that can be stored. The light-dependent reactions happen in the thylakoid membranes. This is really, really important. It needs water and gives off oxygen. In the light-dependent reactions, we need light and we need water, and they can take that light and they can take that water and turn it into ATP, NADPH, and oxygen. When we say that plants give off oxygen, this is what we're talking about. This is where that oxygen comes from. That's the light-dependent reactions. I'll give you a second. I feel like I'm going really quickly. That's our light-dependent reactions. And our second step is called the Calvin cycle. Sometimes this is called the dark reactions or the light-independent reactions, but I don't like that verbiage because the Calvin cycle can happen during the day. It just doesn't need light. That's why light-independent reactions also works, but I like the Calvin cycle. It's called the Calvin cycle because some guy named Melvin Calvin discovered it. In the Calvin cycle, we absorb carbon dioxide. We absorb carbon dioxide and use it to make sugars with energy from ATP and NADPH. The Calvin cycle happens in the stroma. Which is why it's important to have that general idea of what a chloroplast looks like in your head. I think. Yeah, that's where I'm going to leave it. I will draw it out tomorrow. I'm not going to make you rush to draw it out today. But does anybody have any questions about this? Photosynthesis is a 2-step process. It uses light and water and carbon dioxide to make sugars and oxygen. There is an exit ticket on Canvas, but I'm not going to make you do it in 4 minutes or 3 minutes. So we will just do that one another